All right, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our Trailblazer webinar today. My name is Sheryl O'Connor. I'm the CEO and co-founder of IncomeConductor, an award-winning retirement income planning technology that engages your client in the planning process and delivers income certainty, not probability. Our Trailblazer series highlights the people in our industry who are forging new paths and developing new ways to achieve success while providing great outcomes for clients. We welcome your questions, so please type them into the Q&A box at any time during the presentation, and we'll try to address them all at the end of the webinar. So it's my great pleasure to welcome our Trailblazer today, Dr. Meghaan Lurtz, a leading global expert on the psychology of financial planning. A dedicated educator, Meg is a professor of practice at Kansas State University, teaching in the Advanced Financial Planning and Financial Therapy certificate programs. She is also a lecturer at Columbia University and Rutgers University, where she teaches financial psychology. Meg currently serves on multiple financial technology boards, bringing together finances and mental health. She's an active researcher, writer, and an ongoing contributor to the Kitsis platform, writing about the intersection of money, advice, and well-being. Her Substack is listed on our presentation slide. It is less in parentheses, lonely money. So that's a good way to get in touch with Meg. So welcome, Meg. It's a pleasure to have you as my Trailblazer guest.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm thrilled you're joining us. And as we were discussing before, you're my first international guest being located in Italy. So
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
exciting.
nice
So
place.
let's start out by you sharing with our audience, if you will, the why behind your journey. What inspired you to focus on this area of psychology of financial planning?
Yeah, it comes down to the fact that I think people are infinitely interesting and they become even more interesting, when you throw money into the mix. At the time, I was working for a financial technology company
Mhm.
and I was at a conference and I met a man named Dr. Barry Mulholland who was teaching at Texas Tech at the time. And the software company that I was working for, it rebalanced portfolios and in a tax efficient manner. And we were talking about that, and he was like, "So do you like? Is it just the tax stuff?" And I'm like, "Actually, you'd be surprised, like how often people call and they have to rebalance because I don't know, Sarah
Mhm.
wrecked the car or Johnny needs to go to rehab or whatever." And so it had all these like really interesting family dynamics, associated with some of the portfolio behavior, investment behavior.
Mhm.
And so I was talking to him about that, and he goes, "Well, there's a program at Kansas State, there's a program at Georgia that do that. It's called financial therapy, and if you want, I know some of the people there, I'll connect you." And so within short order, this man that I had never met, really changed my life, complete life trajectory change. And I started taking classes at Kansas State in financial therapy under Dr. Christy Archuleta, and fell in love with it. Like in two classes in, I was like, okay, I'm switching over to the PhD. I did ultimately finish the certificates, the master's certificates in financial therapy and financial planning, but went on to get my PhD in financial planning, and have been kind of just always very interested, in this psychology stuff, whether it's the positive psychology, whether it's social psychology, like all just the way that people think and behave, when it comes to their money, the things that they feel, the family
Mhm.
dynamics and relationships. I find all of it infinitely fascinating.
It's funny because this is a common thread with my trailblazers that they will have started in one career or one area, and then something just happens and it piques their interest and
Mhm.
a new passion develops.
Yeah.
And we were just talking, you just got back from New Zealand. So you
Yeah.
were educating people in New Zealand, financial professionals, about the
Yeah.
area of psychology.
Yeah, so financial psychology has been around in the US,
Hmm.
for a while now. The financial psychology textbook and the psychology of financial planning textbook, CFP board has put those out, and they've been out for a while. Outside of the United States, the CFP is run by the Financial Planning Standards Board, and they also have now placed an emphasis, created a textbook around financial psychology. And with that global textbook, uh, there are now lots of places, and I was just in New Zealand, I've been in Ireland, talking about financial psychology and beginning to introduce, those financial planners to these concepts, which is really exciting.
Yeah, must be. So just to set a baseline here,
Mhm.
can you actually define what financial psychology is and also discuss why it's important for advisors, especially financial planners, to understand and apply this discipline with their clients?
Yeah, I love this question. So I like to talk about it from a historical point of view. Like as a researcher, that's kind of how I think about it. So back in the day, a long time ago, there was neoclassical economic theory. And certainly neoclassical economic theory, what people should do, we
Hmm.
should like so we have life cycle hypothesis. Financial planning is built off of life cycle hypothesis and fam like household consumption models. And these are great models, super, super helpful models. They tell us what we should do. But then along in like the 70s and 80s came along the behavioral economists, and they're like, I get that,
Hmm.
traditional economist guys, but people don't always do that, so we should probably look at that too. And so then the behavioral economists were like, hey, so there's lots of goofy things that people do. We're gonna call it heuristics, and their results are gonna be biases. And financial advisors are very familiar with these. We have like endowment effect and status quo bias and loss aversion, all these things. And this
Hmm.
was great. This was like groundbreaking research, so, so important. Nudges came out of this, lots of wonderful, great work came out of this. And then now, a little bit further down, like the research chain, or the chain of research, because it all builds off of itself, the financial psychologists were like, okay, so we get that people don't do what they're supposed to do, and we do, have a good idea of what they should be doing.
Hmm.
Just telling somebody, oh, stop that, that you're just acting irrationally, this is just status quo bias, don't do that. Or, this you're just I get, that you think your house is worth 750,000 even though the market says it's worth 600. This
Hmm.
is endowment effect, people. Don't do that. That doesn't help. That helps nobody. So even though the financial advisor is very good oftentimes at recognizing the bias, financial psychology gives us a lens into what do we actually do about it. And so like as an example, again, your client wants to sell their house, but they can't really seem to make the decision because they don't agree with the market price. A wonderful question to ask is like, okay, imagine client, imagine Sheryl, 5 years into the future, you're living in your new house, life is good, and you find out that your old house, the one that we're thinking about selling, is back on the market.
Hmm.
Do you move back into that house? Most people will say no. And with this sort of recognition, now they have been able to, in many ways, it helps to box the pain in, because that's the painful part. The painful part is I can't let go, of these memories. But if you get them to think, but there's a happy place on the other side, and if you were in that happy place, you wouldn't even worry about this house. But it can be very hard. And so trying to tell somebody, we'll just stop that status quo bias, that doesn't work. But from financial psychology, where we bring in now like therapeutic practices, where we bring in now stuff from mental health, where we bring in now positive psychology and really begin to think about the relationships and the decision-making processes that go into it on an individual level. Now we're really able to help people, with
Hmm.
some of those biases, with some of those heuristics, with some of that just emotional weight that comes with any financial decision, and help them in a way that feels more personal, is actually more productive. That this work is not just about being efficient, it's about being effective.
Hmm.
And I think that is just so exciting, and so much of like what financial planning is, different from just investment management. You're attempting to work with an individual on their life with their independent and idiosyncratic goals, trying to help them to make better decisions. But make better decisions for them given what's going on in their life. And it takes another set of skills.
Yeah, I remember going to a Schwab conference up in Boston in March of 2009.
Mhm.
And I ended up at a table with an advisor, and he had lots of certifications on his name tag. And I said, "Wow, that's quite the alphabet soup." Just kidding around. And he looked at me very seriously, and he said, "I would trade all of these in for a degree in psychology right now."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was a tough time. And so let's talk about some specific tactics. It's hard for advisors to determine clients' biases and emotions around money. They may not be totally honest,
Yeah.
or forthcoming about these feelings. And the other thing is, these feelings may change based on, to your point, what's happening in their personal lives, what's happening in the market. What are some specific methods or tactics that advisors can use to really dig out and understand what their clients are feeling?
I this is such a good question, and there could be like many like fancy things that I could say here, but one of the best ones is to just level with people and just say, "Hey, you know, it seems like, you're going through a really hard time." And I know that typically we come here in this financial planning office or in our financial planning Zoom, and we talk about the numbers of things, but it seems like there's that more than just the numbers matter. Would it be all right, if
Hmm.
we talk about some of this other stuff? Like, how are you feeling? What are you reading? When you think about this, who is it affecting, besides just you? How do you think about that? That so much of a financial planner's job, not very many of us grow up in households where we have good, thoughtful, healthy, not screamy, conversations about money. Very few of us do. And so very, very few of us know how to talk about money well and know at the same time how to talk about things that are in some ways peripheral to the money, but absolutely more important than just the money. In fact, when I was in New Zealand, I was walking with an advisor and we were talking, and he said that, for years, every single time him and his wife, he's a financial advisor, he would bring up money and his wife would react in two ways. Either she would yell or she would just kind of like, I don't want to talk about this
Shut
and walk
down.
away.
Yeah.
It later came out, just through years of their marriage and her kind of becoming more used to him talking about money and being more comfortable, that her parents fought a lot. And so, like, she just saw that, she grew up with that, and now here he is, not trying to fight, but still it sends off those alarm bells in her body of, oh, this person is trying to talk to me about money and this cannot go well. I've never seen this go well. I don't want to do this. And so even in his own marriage, as
Hmm.
a financial advisor, it was really hard to talk about money because of all the things that, his wife had experienced, and so with our clients, we don't always know, what they've been through. We don't always know, what it is that they think. And even though they say, they want help, and even though they say that they value, financial planning, I'm not saying that they don't, but I'm also saying that not a lot of people really know what that means. And one of the greatest values that a financial planner can bring is sort of being there to demonstrate how to talk about money in safe ways, in productive ways, in thoughtful and organized ways, uh, because very, very often we don't get that anywhere else. And so it can be hard to approach some of these topics with clients, but I have found in my work, whether it's coaching advisors on having conversations like this or actually having conversations with this with clients on my own, that people don't raise their hand. Like my own dad, I'll tell you a very fast story. My own dad, he's an
Yeah.
engineer, and I was talking to my dad. I was in grad school, and I was over at my dad's house having dinner. And I remember because he was standing in front of me with like like two plates of steak. And he's like, "So you're studying money?" And my dad always wanted me to be like a CPA. So he like thought, okay, a win. My daughter's finally studying money. I did not study money up until that point.
Yeah.
And then he goes, "But but also like feelings. He says it like that, but like feelings and like his whole body and almost like pulled the stake back. And he says, that sounds like a nightmare, and so it's like my own dad is like, good luck with that profession, like I don't even know what to think about that. And so many people, so many well-meaning people. And my dad, he is a typical engineer, but he's also a very emotional man. But if you say to my dad, well, how are you feeling without, kind of prompting him, he'll say, well, that doesn't matter right now. Like we should be logical about this. But if you talk to my dad, about his kids or about his life or the things that he thinks are important, and then you say, given everything that you've said, it seems to me, that maybe you're feeling like this. My dad will go right along with it. Like he doesn't. So how we approach people, how we teach people to talk about money, how we talk about money to people, maybe not going, directly in. This is another thing that I think is funny. We ask a lot of questions as financial advisors, obviously part of our
Mhm.
job. But in the brain, when you ask somebody a question, it can set off like an alarm bell. People know because they've been doing this since school that when somebody asks you a question, there's clearly a right answer. And like, do you know it? So innocuously, an advisor might say, oh, so how much have you saved for retirement? And they don't mean it bad, but that client is automatically thinking, oh, great. Like I'm sitting in front of Sheryl. Sheryl knows all the things. Now I feel embarrassed. Did I save too much? Have I not saved enough? Should I have started earlier? And it's like, whereas if we had said, okay, you're here to talk about retirement. Retirement's a great goal. Tell me a little bit about what you picture. Tell me
Yeah.
about that. Like, and so we say things actually as a command, like detail for me, tell me, instead of just asking a question. But also, we don't start with just the numbers, getting them to talk a little bit about their ideas, getting them to talk a little bit about what they think, and then, saying, well, tell me how much you think all that's going to cost, like almost as like a tease, then it gets people to relax a little bit and to not think
Mhm.
this is just a financial test. And so all of these things fall into the bucket of financial psychology, not just how I really liked CFP board, they named their book The Psychology of Financial Planning. And I thought that that was really important because it really encompassed not only the psychology of any individual, like a client, but
Mhm.
also the relationship dynamics, between the client and the advisor, and to recognize that the advisor, is there for advice, is there for all these really important things, but how you present, how you show up, how you help people to feel safe, the way that you construct the questions that you ask,
Mhm.
all makes a difference to the amount of trust a person will feel and how comfortable they will feel, and how well you can engage, around some of these different biases or emotional things that are also going on at the same time, as the financial decision.
Yeah, it's such an important step. And I know that, advisors, their time is packed. They have a lot to do. So they've got a client meeting and, the client comes in and the pleasantries are, exchange. How are you doing? How's it going? But
Right,
it's not a deep conversation. It's like
right,
sort of a very quick precursor to let's jump into the numbers,
right, right,
right?
right.
Because that's what advisors feel most comfortable with. They've done the analysis, they've been working on the plan.
Sure. Yes.
Um, but that kind of breathing step before to relax and get everybody, talking and engaged. So questioning is a good tactic, right? But not the direct question like I'm giving you a quiz and I've got my red pencil out.
Right. I think I like to explain it, instead of asking a question, you want to command information. So you want to
Uh-huh.
say, detail for me, tell me, share with me. Oh, that's really interesting. Like, where did you learn that? Like these are,
Mhm.
tell me where you learned that. These are commands, and you can learn the same thing, but for whatever reason in the brain, the command doesn't set off as many alarm bells as the question.
And sometimes my partner Phil has been a retail advisor specializing in retirement income for almost 40 years. And he has a story of a couple that he worked with for quite a while during their accumulation phase. And then when they were starting in doing retirement income planning, the husband just announced when he was going through this kind of goals exercise that he wanted to buy a house in Arizona and move there. And the wife just, she almost fell off her chair. It
Yeah.
was, it was total news to her. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's a three-way conversation
Oh yeah.
rather
Yeah.
than just the advisor and the client sitting on the other side of the table, right?
Absolutely. I think that as you add people, it becomes exponentially more difficult. Like you think
Yeah.
that one person could be a little bit tough sometimes. Well, now add their partner who has a completely different backstory, a completely different relationship with money,
Hmm.
and they may not talk about it much at home, and you have to serve both. And if you're one of those financial advisors that is lucky enough to serve a family, so now we've got multiple generations. Like again, it adds to the fun, but it also adds to the complication of
Yeah.
managing the relationship dynamics, in addition and the relationship goals, and the individual goals, because both are important. You're still,
Hmm.
even though these two people have committed to each other, they're still individuals and they may wish to have, individual goals or pursuits and things like that, even amongst or even under, the umbrella of their relationship and some of their relational goals. Um, and how to balance that, how to take that into account, certainly, how to address, both individuals during a meeting. Uh,
Hmm.
that this becomes really important. And it's again, uh, I like to point out that like marriage and family therapists, are trained. They had like that's a special designation, above being just a therapist, not just a therapist, but a therapist, because they receive extra training, to know how to work with a couple over
Yeah.
knowing how to work with just a single client. And
Yeah.
so in financial planning, we often work with couples, we sometimes work with families. Um, and advisors don't typically get that training.
Hmm.
So I think that, again, with the rise of financial psychology, thinking about, couples work and family dynamics, it is another area of why this discipline matters and how this discipline can be very helpful to financial planners.
Yeah, especially I think in retirement because life gets very complicated. People are aging, parents are aging,
Yeah,
and then the kids start getting involved,
right.
and helping them make decisions. And there are so many critical decisions that retirees have to make that have huge impacts on
Yeah.
their finances, where they're going to spend their final years.
Mhm. Mhm.
What kind of facility
Yeah.
they want to be in, what kind of healthcare and long-term care they might need, their legacy goals, which
Right.
is,
Right.
kind of a hot topic for families, among others. Can advisors help? How can advisors help their clients navigate through these really big decisions? Because retirement is a time when if you do make a mistake, it's
Yeah.
really hard
Don't
to
have
correct,
time.
really hard to course correct.
Yeah. Well, so a few things. One, assuming the advisor feels comfortable, kind of
Mhm.
back to what we were saying earlier, to state the obvious, to say, like, hey, I get that what we're here to do is kind of map this out financially, but we are talking about some really big things. And if you would like, I'm open to spending time on those. And here, are some ways that you might want to think about that. So as the advisor, not forcing anybody to do it, not making anybody do it, but stating the obvious that this is not just a financial conversation and getting permission from the client, maybe even saying, hey, let's talk about the numbers part in two meetings from now. And for the next couple of times we meet, I want to talk about this and I want to talk about this. I think sometimes putting a container around some of those more emotional conversations can help people feel like, well, at least there's a beginning and there's an end. That this doesn't have to go on forever. But then at least then they've talked about it. Another thing to consider is that you don't have to go it alone. There are people that work in this space, I being one of them, where it's kind of like the blend of finance and therapy, and so
Mhm.
the work that I do at Beyond the Plan, we actually work with financial advisor firms to offer, we call it financial behavioral coaching. But if a client, is wanting to work through their legacy and maybe you're not comfortable like facilitating a family meeting, well,
Mhm.
you can hire someone to do that. And in my experience, oftentimes that is a very good idea, only because you run the risk of if the facilitation doesn't go well, which is not always something that you can control. There are families that are deeply contentious. Um, you didn't solve the problem, so you may end up getting fired, which is very different than bringing in a specialist like myself and or
Mhm.
somebody like me. There's lots of people that do what I do, and we're gonna. So you tell the family we're gonna hire this person, but now you're still on the same side of the table. You're
Mhm.
still like got your clients back, and so if it doesn't go well, you can be like, well, we just don't like her. Like we tried, but there are other people. Let's just fire
Yeah.
her. And we'll try again. But this so if you don't want to do this type of work, or it's a really big situation like that and you would
Yeah.
like support, there are people that do that, hiring a mediator, hiring
Mhm.
a marriage and family therapist. And again, there is the Financial Therapy Association. There are a number of members, and they all do similar work to this. And so even though you may not work with that person all the time, but find somebody in your
Yeah.
area or through the network, and recognize in the same way that just like you work with a estate planner, just like you work with a CPA, having a mental health, behavioral health uh, perspective, that can also be
Mhm.
brought into the room to help facilitate conversations, to, think more broadly about things like legacy and stuff like that. Um, that sometimes that can be a wonderful option as well. It did like I feel like so much responsibility oftentimes is put onto the financial advisor, and certainly financial advisors have a very big job and an outsized role given their relationship with the client. And so I like to remind advisors that they don't have to be everything to everyone. This is a very specialized set of skills. And even though advisors can be good at it, advisors can set the groundwork and say, "Hey, I want to take time to talk
Mhm.
about this," which can be great. But if you still don't feel comfortable, or if you want that other perspective, or you want to be able to say, maybe your firm is just more into stuff like that, and you want to be able to say, hey, we work with a behavioral person, we can bring them into
Mhm.
this conversation. I think that's great.
I think it's wonderful having that objective third party.
Yeah,
That's what divorce financial planners do. They
right.
come in as
Absolutely.
that objective third party, separate from the client advisor,
Hmm.
and help navigate through without, causing any rift between the client and the advisor. So, what a great service. We do have a question. Do you recommend planners obtain a behavioral finance designation, and what do you recommend?
Yes. Across the board, I would say yeah. There are many of them. Um, and I think that different ones can be good for different people.
Hmm.
Like George Kinder's life planning, they help you to learn how to do the evoke process. It is deep work. It is powerful work. Money Quotient, they have like some of the best like question sets. They have great guides for how to have meetings. Certainly those meetings go deeper, but it's very different like than the evoke process. There are the financial transitionists. This is like a year-long training. You go through it as a cohort. It's a really awesome experience. In some ways, it could almost be like a blend of the other two, and that they have some tools. They have like some processes that can be very helpful. Um, you certainly go deeper, but that training is good. The Shaping Wealth, where I work, I'm a partner. We also have some training, which is great. K-State, where I teach, has a financial therapy designation. Georgia and Texas Tech also have programs related to that. If you're more of like a academic person, you like being
Mhm.
in a college environment sort of thing with like other students. The Financial Therapy Association, you can go directly through them. And then I think that there are other, maybe some of you on this call have heard of like motivational interviewing, or maybe you've heard of appreciative inquiry. These are styles of what therapeutic communication. And so I learned this from Dr. Christy Archuleta, who was my professor at the time. She said there's a big difference between being therapeutic and doing therapy. And so, like motivational interviewing, nonviolent communication, appreciative inquiry, exquisite listening, these are all skills that you can go to a seminar and learn these skills. And
Hmm.
so, learning those communication skills will help you to be more comfortable having these conversations. And even if you were to pick up one of those other designations, still doing like a deep dive on motivational interviewing, for an example, which are trainings you can get anywhere. They are not necessarily expensive. Another thing that's really nice about those, or something to think about, or that I would encourage all of you on this call to think about, I consider communication like a contact sport. I grew up in Kansas City. Patrick Mahomes did not walk onto a football field after listening to like a podcast and reading a book on how to throw a football and act like that.
You have
And
to
so,
practice.
yeah, it takes
Yeah.
practice, real time, other people for years. And so communication is the same. You can't
Mhm.
listen to this lovely podcast between me and Sheryl and then think, okay, I've got it. She says not to ask questions. She says to command information. Done. Like that it's just not that easy. And so I encourage you, for whatever program you search out, that you find one that has a cohort, that has people that you have to talk to, that there's an opportunity to practice and get feedback. Um, because that is the only way to truly get better at this communication stuff.
Wow, that is great advice. Do you know of any certifications that are recognized by broker-dealers where the advisor can actually, list the certification on their disclosure?
Uh, I think that the one from Think to Perform, which is the like behavioral, I forget what they call it, but it's at Think to Perform. I believe that theirs can.
Hmm.
And I think that you can list like if you get the CFT, which is a certified financial therapist, you could list that on your
Mhm.
like I don't think there's any rules against that. Um, Not all of them have. Like the financial transitionist, I believe that you get a certificate, but it's not a designation. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So, you could still do this training, but it wouldn't be like another set of letters behind your name. But
Yeah.
the CFT, for example, does have that,
Hmm.
or the
So
BFA, I
lots of
think is what it's
lots
called.
of training out there available as well
Yes,
as
more and more
support.
all the time, more and more
Yeah.
all the time.
I
Mhm.
also think this is an opportunity where I'm seeing, hybrid RIAs, independent RIAs developing this concept of the advisor team,
Yeah,
where there may be, three or four members of the team. Maybe one person is more adept at this kind of communication
yeah.
than the other members of the team. So, that's kind of their specialty with the client base.
I have seen that too, and I even look to like family offices. I mean, family offices
Hmm.
for a long time notoriously have had a psychologist.
Yeah.
So it's people need this work, and it is not uncommon or weird. I think for most people, they've probably never had a financial planner. And maybe they've never had a therapist. And so they may think that's a little bit different, but in higher echelons of wealth, this is super common and
Hmm.
a really good thing, because especially if you have the type of wealth that's going to last generations, you like it helps to have somebody to talk to for educational purposes, for legacy purposes. So this is not an uncommon thing, and I think that it's a good thing, that it's growing and that more firms are trying to develop that in some way. And in many ways, the work that I do at Beyond the Plan is just that. Like there is a team of financial therapists or behavioral specialists, and Beyond the Plan partners with those firms. And so now you have somebody that you can, give a referral to your clients, or you can ask that,
Hmm.
hey, one of the one of the most fun things that I do is individual firms will ask me to do a webinar. And so maybe they have a client event night, and instead of having
Hmm.
somebody from, I don't know, an investment company come, which are those people are great too, but like they have me come, and I
Yeah.
talk about positive psychology or I talk about legacy. And the neat thing that happens is that this sort of opens the door for the clients. They think,
Hmm.
oh, I didn't know that I could talk about it like that, or I didn't know that I could think about it like that. And now that they've heard me speak, they will literally call their advisor, the next week and say, "Hey, I listened to that lady and she was talking about, legacy and
Hmm.
that got me thinking about my plan and now I want to commit and I want to talk to you about that." And so now, the advisor doesn't even have to do anything. Like the client has sort of self-selected, into talking about finance in this way. They just didn't know that
Yeah.
that was possible or they hadn't thought about that it could be thought about like that. And in some ways, it just gives them a little bit of permission. Another sort
Yep.
of great way to do this is like Morgan Housel, Brian Portnoy, Carl Richards. These individuals have written, or Brad Klontz, these individuals have written books about financial psychology and or about how psychology and relationships end up in financial decisions. And these books are wonderful to read. And so the next, like, go buy 50 of them, and send them out to your clients for like
Mhm.
I don't know, what's the next holiday coming up? Today was April Fool's. Like you could have sent one to everybody and been like, it's not an April Fool's joke. I really want to talk about money like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now people will read the book and they'll be like, yeah, I read Brian Portnoy's book and it really got me thinking about blah, blah, blah. Great. Again, like now they kind of self-select into it. So there's many ways to kind of get clients to begin going down this path. Um,
Well, I love
the
that seminar
advisor.
idea because it also communicates the fact that
Yes.
the advisor thinks this is an important topic
Right. Right. Right.
and they're willing to bring an expert like you in to talk with the clients to help them
Right.
work through this.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Steve. Can you list those resources in the meeting notes? And I'm wondering if you could send me
Yeah, I will.
the books and the training programs that you've talked about. Everybody who's registered for the webinar today will get a link to our YouTube channel where they can rewatch this conversation. But it would be helpful. I could send out those resources.
Yeah.
And we're way over time. We could talk with you for hours, Meg.
It's a fun topic,
But
everybody.
just
Financial
to,
psychology
just to
rocks.
wrap up, can you share with our listeners about your Substack
Yeah.
and what you offer?
Yeah, so I have a Substack. So if you like this kind of stuff, I write a monthly post. The new one actually just went out today. It's about small talk, oddly enough. And I it's a new topic every month, but like I'm covering greed next month. I just did a couple things on death and dying, which may not sound very exciting, but a lot of people really liked them. And it's just it doesn't cost anything. It's free. But if you go and sign up, you'll get a monthly email in your inbox from me that has information. I do sort of like a podcast with a friend of mine, Ashley Kwame. We are in cahoots together at Beyond the Plan. That comes out on the middle of the month, every month on Less Lonely Money as well. And we're usually talking about, like, we actually just did a whole thing on motivational interviewing. So if you wondered what that was, you could go watch this like 30-minute podcast and it's not a class on it, but it gives you an idea of
Yeah.
what it is. We're going to be talking about how to deal with resistance. I've had a lot of advisors say to me lately, "Hey, my client told me that they ran the plan that I gave them through ChatGPT and now they have a question, what in the hell and how do I deal with that?" Like
Yeah.
that question has been posed to me now multiple times. And so how to greet that, not as a challenge, but as an opportunity to connect, because in reality, there are so many ways that clients can do what they want to do, and they can technically do it behind your back. And so the fact that they do want to talk about it, I think is actually a really good sign, even though for a long time, in financial planning, we're used to just kind of being the arbiters and we're like people don't say
Mm.
anything. But now, that's changing, and I think that that could be exciting. So we're going to be talking about that if that's happening to you and you're interested about what to do. But So yeah, Less Lonely Money Substack is just it's written really for advisors. They are rather long. They're like 3,000 to 5,000 words, but they're well researched.
Mhm.
And just talking about different dimensions of financial psychology and what that means.
Well, I subscribed and I've been receiving them and they're wonderful. So
Thank you.
I look forward to it. So I hope our attendees also register for the newsletter. We are way over time. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I can't think of a more timely uh, moment with, all of the uncertainty that we're facing in the world right now for
Yeah.
you to share your expertise in this area, Meg. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's
Thank
been
you, Cheryl.
wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you,
All
everybody.
right. And thank you to all our attendees for your time today. Be on the watch out for our next Trailblazer webinar next month. Have a great day.
Take care.